Hello and welcome everyone to this video on using emotional literacy to help better cope with emotions and stressful events and situations. My name is Dr. Anastasia Hronis. I am a clinical psychologist, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how we can use and build our emotional literacy from a type of therapy that's called Dialectical Behavior Therapy. Now, if you have a look at some of the other videos that I have made on dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT for short, you'll see that there's quite a few elements to this therapy. But today we're really going to be honing in and focusing on emotional literacy. And essentially what I mean by emotional literacy is the ability to name, recognize, and develop some understanding and insight into our own feelings. This is a really crucial and key part for us to be able to better then manage stressful or difficult situations or anything that might arise where we do feel some sense of, I want to say emotional disturbance or sort of uneasy feeling, whether that be stress or any other feeling that we might have. So as I've said, my name's Anastasia. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work both clinically and I work in academia and in research as well at the University of Technology, Sydney. And DBT, or Dialectical Behavior Therapy, is a type of therapy that I think is really important for people to be across, whether or not they use the full therapy or sort of take bits of skills from it. There really are a lot of skills within the program that can help us build our understanding of emotions, learn how to navigate very intense, stressful, and just overwhelming feelings that we might have. DBT also helps us build our interpersonal skills and learn how to communicate most effectively with other people. And it also teaches us mindfulness skills, which helps us be kind of aware, present, and centered and grounded in the moment to be able to best deal with whatever comes our way. Now, I wanted to include this quote because I thought it was really fitting and relevant to this concept of emotional literacy and understanding and using our skills around emotions to navigate stressful situations. So it says, your emotions make you human. Even the unpleasant ones have a purpose. Don't lock them away. If you ignore them, they will just get louder and angrier. Now, again, I find this really fitting from the clinical work that I do. It's very much often the case that we see people who might have experienced some emotions, and a very understandable way of trying to deal with these feelings might be to actually sort of push them away or suppress them and not deal with them. And, why wouldn't we think to do that, right? Emotions can be unpleasant at times, and we don't necessarily want to feel the full intensity of them. It sometimes feels temporarily better to kind of lock them away and push them away. But what we know is that as psychologists, we know it's not an effective long-term solution. If I can give you the analogy of, imagine you have a ball, like a beach ball, and you're holding it in a tub full of water, say a big bathtub or a swimming pool or something, and you're putting your hands on it and you're pushing that ball under the water. That ball represents our feelings, and what we're doing is we're pushing it away. Now, we might be able to do that really quite effectively for some period of time, but eventually what's going to happen is our arms are going to get tired, our body's going to get tired, we're going to let go, and what happens? The ball bounces back up. Now, the difficult thing about this is that when the ball bounces back up, or when those feelings come back to the surface, it's often at a time that is really probably quite inconvenient for us. We don't have a lot of control over when that happens. It just does. And what we find is that often for people, it is when we are feeling somewhat run down, burnt out, we've got a lot of life stresses going on, we're not sort of functioning at our best, that things that we've sort of pushed away then come back to the surface because we have less capacity to keep them pushed away. So the strategies and skills I'm going to talk through today help us understand our feelings a little bit better, and also look at how we can regulate our emotions best on a sort of day-to-day level. Now, I really want to emphasize that all emotions have a function, right? So as human beings, we have developed the capacity to have feelings and to have emotions because they serve a function. They exist for a reason, and that is that emotions communicate messages both to us and to other people. So emotions are a form and a source of information and communication. Now, if we think about back to the sort of caveman days, emotions have developed as a way to help us survive. Emotions can be very immediate and quick sources of information. So in that way, when they're accurate, I'll sort of add, they can be very efficient ways to solve problems that have helped humans survive. So back in the caveman day, if we were out in the wild and we saw a lion, hopefully our emotional capacity had been developed to the point where we might feel fear or anxiety very immediately, very quickly, and that would provoke an instinctual response to run away, to hide, to get out of that situation. That's our fight, flight, or freeze response that we refer to. So emotions in that situation have formed as a way of keeping us alive, protecting us, helping survival, but also communicating information to us very quickly and very efficiently. So I say this because often I hear people talking about sort of wanting to get rid of emotions or wishing emotions didn't exist, particularly the ones that don't feel so good. It can help us in managing and dealing with our emotions if we do start to understand the function of emotions and that they exist for a reason. If we can look to what is the message that this feeling is giving me in this moment, it's going to make me handling that feeling just a little bit easier, and it'll help me feel more capable of being able to manage the emotions. So why do certain emotions exist? I want to go through some of the key ones, and the key emotions that feel, a bit more unpleasant and difficult to deal with. Because I don't really ever often hear people complain about feeling the really positive emotions like joy and happiness and love and excitement. It's often fear, anger, shame, guilt, jealousy, etc., that people are sort of wishing didn't exist and wishing that they could just sort of push away and keep suppressed. So fear, as we've already touched on, why does fear exist? Well, it helps us respond to particular threats in our life. It helps us recognize danger and also escape from that danger as well. We also have the feeling of anger. This can be a really difficult and unpleasant one for people to sit with and tolerate. And very often people will feel anger and want to do something with it. So in being able to recognize our emotions as well, not only are we building the capacity to have greater literacy about our emotions, but also distinguish between I can have a feeling and I can have an urge attached to that feeling, right? If I'm angry, maybe I want to yell at someone, or maybe I want to send an angry text message, or maybe I want to protest, whatever it might be. Anger might drive me to want to do something. But it's also important for us to recognize that just because I have that feeling doesn't mean I need to act from a place of feeling angry. And we'll unpack this a little bit more in the subsequent slides, but just keep that in mind as we go through these emotions. So the feeling of anger communicates a message to us. It tells us that there might have been some sort of attack on our sense of self, or maybe towards other people that are important to us. Anger helps us focus on sort of self-defense or maybe regaining control over a situation. And it also tells us that there might have been some sort of sense of injustice. So essentially, anger is telling me that something important to me has been compromised in some way, and that doesn't feel good. And often the urge attached with anger is to do something about it. If we feel there's been some sort of injustice, we often want to say something, do something, act from a place of anger. The next emotion we have is that of sadness. Again, a very common sort of primal emotion that we experience that exists for a reason. Sadness communicates the message that we have lost something that's important to us, or that perhaps we have particular goals that are important to us that haven't been attained. If we think about what sadness might help us do, in the long run, it might actually help us focus on what we do value and acting in pursuit of the goals that we have. Sadness can also communicate to other people that we need help. If we think physically about what sadness looks like, if you picture a sad person in your mind, right? They might be crying, their face sort of might be, their eyes might be turned down, their shoulders might be slumped over, they might be looking at the floor. They don't necessarily have a positive, open kind of vibe about them. That sort of body language that's attached to sadness pulls on other people to bring them in, to ask the question of, are you okay? Do you need assistance? Is everything all right? So sadness in that sense not only communicates to us, but it can communicate to other people as well, that we might need some help, support, assistance, whatever it may be in that moment. Okay, the next emotion we have is that of guilt. Now, guilt, again, for most people, an unpleasant emotion to experience, but it does communicate a message to us. It tells us that we have actions, or that we've engaged in a way that has led to a violation of what our values are. So essentially, we've done something that we regret, and that thing doesn't align with our values or the person that we want to be or the life that we want to live. So guilt in this way can sort of serve as a bit of a moral compass for ourselves. It doesn't relate to other people, but it's very inward focused. It's the moral compass of, this is the direction I want to go in my life, or this is what's important to me in my life, and I feel guilty when I deviate from that. So while guilt is an unpleasant feeling, it can actually be a really important one in the long run to help us live a life that feels fulfilling, satisfying, and morally in line with what we believe. And finally, we'll look at a positive one. We'll look at the feeling of love. So this is a more pleasant experience for us to have and emotion to feel. But what sort of message does it communicate? Why do we experience love? Well, on the one hand, it can drive reproduction, but it can also help us focus our behaviors on a sense of union and attachment to other people. It helps us recognize that particular people or relationships are important to us, and to focus our efforts on building those relationships even further. So this one, a more pleasant one to experience, but as with all the others, a very useful and important emotion for us to experience, because it does help us guide us in our life. Now, I want to just draw your attention again as we build our sense of emotional literacy to help us understand our feelings and how they relate in certain situations, to this model of understanding emotions. Now, I'm just going to briefly talk through each of these boxes. So in any given situation, we might start off with some vulnerability factors. So things that might make us vulnerable to feeling a certain feeling. So maybe, for example, I haven't had a good night's sleep, or maybe I haven't had breakfast, or maybe I have a big long to-do list already as I enter the day, or maybe I've just had a fight with my best friend. So there might be things that are kind of beneath the surface that make me more vulnerable to experiencing some sort of difficulty that day. The vulnerability factors then lead into a prompting event. So what essentially I mean by this is the situation that might then lead me to feel a particular feeling, whatever that may be. Now, from that event, we have our interpretation of the situation. And again, what this relates to are our thoughts, the way we think about the situation, the way we interpret it, what our beliefs are in that situation. These then lead to changes, both internal and external changes. So based on the situation that's happened, the thoughts that I've had, I might have internal feelings, physical sensations, urges that come about. And I might also have external changes. So my body language might change, my facial expression might change, what I say might change. And all these come together to form the emotion that I'm feeling. So again, we won't go into this, but if you think back to all the feelings we went through, fear, anger, love, guilt, etc., all of these feelings have particular experiences attached to them, whether they're internal sort of bodily experiences or whether they're external facial expressions, body language, etc., attached to them. So these things come together to help us experience whatever the emotion is that we're experiencing. From that, we might have some secondary after effects. So we might have some secondary emotions. There might be some consequences from what we choose to do. There might be some additional behaviors that we engage in. And these can sort of spiral back and lead us to sort of perpetuate the cycle that we go through. The reason I break this down is because it's really important for us to distinguish between the event itself, our thoughts and interpretation of it, the feelings we experience and how that creates an emotion, and then also any behaviors that we might do, because each of these are separate points for us to do something different. The way I work with my thoughts and my interpretations is different to the way I might work with my feelings, which is different to the way I might work with my behaviors and actions. So really what we're trying to do is just understand that we can break down this experience into its simplest parts. Now, the big colorful circle that you'll see on your screen is what we call a feelings wheel. And if you kind of zoom in, you'll see that there's a whole lot of emotions that are described on that feelings wheel. And they're sort of categorized into slightly different categories as well, depending on the experience of a particular feeling and how we can further break it down. So for example, in the blue section at the center, we have sad, but we can break that down into feeling lonely, or even further feeling isolated or abandoned, or experiencing grief, or feeling disappointed. So there's further ways in which we can break down that emotion. But the more specific we can be with our feelings, sometimes the better. Now, we know as psychologists that simply naming and identifying an emotion can actually help reduce it. So if I'm in a situation where I'm feeling angry, for example, something's happened and I'm feeling quite angry, simply me identifying, naming, and describing that emotion can actually help bring it down in intensity. So what we want to do is take a mindful kind of objective stance towards the emotion and describe what it feels like in the body. So this might sound like something I would sort of internally say to myself, right now in this moment, I'm feeling angry. And the way I know I'm feeling angry is I feel hot. I can feel that I'm like clenching my muscles and clenching my hands and my fists. I'm sort of clenching my jaw. My jaw is tight. I'm sort of tensing my eyebrows and my forehead. I feel like I've got a lot of energy in my body, like I want to pace around and kind of walk back and forth in the room. So I'm not actually trying to change the feeling or do something different with it. I'm simply identifying this is what's going on in my body, and I'm taking a mindful approach to it. And what I mean by that is I'm not necessarily evaluating it as good or bad or anything in between. I'm simply just saying to myself, this is what is happening. This is what it is right now. I'm angry, and these are all the sort of symptoms of anger that I'm experiencing. Now, that objective, non-judgmental approach actually helps reduce the intensity of a feeling, because what we find is that it's the judgments that we attach to what we're thinking, what we're experiencing, and what we're feeling that can actually fuel the emotions further and build them further and further. And that's kind of what we want to step away in those moments to help reduce the intensity and sort of de-escalate things for ourselves. So what we also want to do is, if we've thought about how we can sort of objectively look at our emotions, we also want to be able to objectively look at our thoughts. So we can engage in this process that we call in DBT, check the facts. So I ask myself the question, does this emotion I'm feeling and its intensity fit the facts? And it's important to kind of think about both of those. Does the emotion fit the facts, but also does the intensity of the emotion I'm experiencing fit the facts of the situation, right? Which really requires us to be able to step back, objectively look at the situations, and assess the facts. Now, what I mean by a fact, it's not a belief, it's not a judgment, it's not an opinion. A fact is something that if I took it to court, it would stand up as evidence. So we really got to sort of be able to kind of distinguish between what's me being a bit biased and having an opinion versus what is an objective fact. So if my emotion and its intensity does fit the facts of the situation, I then kind of want to go on and ask myself, is acting from this emotion actually going to be effective and useful for me? You know, if I'm feeling really angry in this moment and it fits the facts, do I want to act from a place of anger? Is it going to be useful, helpful, effective for me in this moment? Or is it potentially actually just going to make the situation worse, as valid as my feeling is? I might want to consider, is it useful to act from this place of emotion, or do I need to do some sort of problem solving? Do I maybe need to do a bit of a pros and cons? Is there some way I can rationally work through this emotion that I'm experiencing? And we might also want to consider, again, another DBT skill, which is opposite action. So if my emotions fit the facts, but it's not going to be effective for me to act from them, then maybe I want to do something opposite to what my emotions are telling me. So if I feel like I'm angry and I want to kind of yell at someone, maybe I can do something sort of opposite to that if I know that yelling at them is not going to be an effective move. This also applies when my emotions and the intensity of my emotions don't fit the facts of a situation. So sometimes we feel things because we're human, we have emotional experiences, but they actually just don't fit the facts of the situation. I might feel angry even though there's no real need or reason for me to feel angry in this situation. And that could be because I've misinterpreted something, or it could be because maybe something from my past has been triggered up and I've become angry. But really, I don't need to be angry in this situation. This is also a time when doing something like opposite action is going to be quite effective. I'm going to act in an opposite way to what my feeling is telling me to do. So, some key takeaway points from today. Hopefully you've been able to learn and understand that emotions are really important. We certainly don't want to get rid of them. They serve a really important purpose and function. But what we want to build is our ability to understand our emotions and also regulate them so that we can feel more in control of the emotional experiences that we have. The overall goal that we should have is to be able to regulate our emotions as best as we can. We certainly don't want to be avoiding any kind of bad feelings, and I put bad in quotation marks because we don't really want to label emotions as good or bad. They're certainly pleasant and unpleasant, but we don't want to be avoiding any emotions at all because that doesn't really work as a long-term strategy. Our goal is to be able to sit with them, understand why they're there, and then really sort of objectively figure out, is this emotion useful for me in this moment? And will I act from a place of this emotion, or will I choose to do something else instead? So hopefully this video has given you a bit of insight into emotion regulation and how to handle some stressful and difficult situations, and built your ability to understand yourself and what you experience a little bit better. So thank you for watching.